Positive Psych. We're the Fallen Angels. This Saturday, March 15th, is our debut here in Sanders. We're going to be singing with the Harvard Opera Tunes. So we'd love to see all your positive faces there. It's Saturday, 8 p.m. You can get your tickets at the Harvard box office from any opera tune or from your favorite angel. I have tickets, so find me after class. They're $8. Find me.
Carpe diem, seize the day. So let's continue on this path and go a little bit more in depth into this idea of self-concordance. What are some of the benefits of self-concordance? The first one, and there are many, the first one is the obvious one. You don't need to be a rocket scientist or even a social scientist to understand that setting self-concordant goals can potentially make us happier. Because we're pursuing something we care about, it is more likely to reinforce our enjoyment of the journey. The second thing, in addition to increasing well-being, certainly connected to well-being, is that very often having self-concordant goals, having goals in general, but in particular self-concordant goals, resolves internal conflicts. For example, it helps us deal with anxiety, with uncertainty, with existential questions. What am I about? What am I doing? Why am I here? And if you think about it, very often when we go through periods when we're not sure where we're going, where every fork in the road is about ambivalence and uncertainty, that's when the existential questions come up. That's when there's uncertainty. That's when very often there is unhappiness. Whereas when we know what our path is, it helps to resolve internal conflict. An interesting way to think about it is by drawing comparison to interpersonal conflicts. So here we're talking about intrapersonal conflicts within. Anxiety, depression, often a result of that. But there's a lot of research on interpersonal conflicts. And I talked about briefly when I discussed practical idealism and conflict resolution. And the way to deal with conflicts, the best way to deal with conflicts and resolve them, is to have a superordinate goal. A goal in which both sides, both conflicting sides, engage in and are dependent on one another, are interdependent. And that resolves interpersonal or intergroup conflicts. This is the work of Muzaffar Sharif or Elliot Aronson. In the same way, having a goal helps to solve internal conflicts, intrapersonal conflicts, because it takes our mind away from those existential, often important, but sometimes difficult questions, especially when they persist, away from anxiety, away from depression, and we're focused on something we really, really want to do. Also, it increases the likelihood of success. Individuals who set self-concordant goals are more motivated, they're more likely to work hard, they're more likely to put their all in whatever it is that they're doing. In the long term, those who pursue their passions are more likely to succeed. Again, seems pretty straightforward, pretty self-evident, common sense, but as we've often said, common sense is not that common. In many ways, this increased likelihood of success when we pursue the things that we're passionate about defies the no pain, no gain maxim. It defies it and changes it to the following maxim: do it better with pleasure. Now, if you quote me on this, I'll deny it. I did not say it. If you show someone the video of me saying it, I will say that it's my cheesy twin brother who coined it. But it's true. We do it better with pleasure if we pursue our passions. What happens in practice, and again, there's a lot of research on it. You're reading some of it. I elaborate on some of it in the book. There's a lot of research that shows that when we're engaged in a self-concordant goal, we're much more likely to then continue to pursue self-concordant goals. Because it was good, we were more successful, we want more of it. It's self-reinforcing. Not just on the macro level of life goals, where it does that, but also on the micro level. And what we see is a trickle effect. People who set self-concordant goals were actually doing better in areas that were not necessarily self-concordant. For instance, let's say you're a member of an undergrad a cappella group, and you really enjoy it, and it's self-concordant, it's something that you believe in, it's something that you enjoy, something that is interesting to you, something that you're doing because you really, really want to be doing it. In other words, a self-concordant goal, that will have an effect, a positive effect on other areas in your life, such as a class that you don't necessarily enjoy that much, but you're doing more because you feel that you have to, as opposed to because you really, really want to. So potentially identifying self-concordant goals can also help you improve your grades. Again, even though they're not related at all. Because overall you're more motivated, you're more excited, you're more interested, and you enjoy life as a whole more, and positive emotions have a trickle effect. In a way, you can think about it like a candle in a dark room. Very often you don't need to light up the entire room with lights. A single candle is sometimes enough to spread light to darkened corners of the room. The same with self-concordant goals. They have a trickle effect. Choosing to do things, doing what we want to do, has also health benefits. This is one of the most important studies done in the field of psychology by, once again, our own Ellen Langer. What she did was go into old age homes and divided the old age home randomly into two groups. The one group got all the support that they needed. Whatever they wanted, they got. They asked for certain food, they got it. They asked to be helped carry out certain tasks, they got it. Everything was done for them. In many ways, the old age homes that many people dream of. And then the second group didn't have it as good. Not everything was catered for. They very often had to do their own things. For example, notably, they had to water their own plants. They very often had to set their own routine during the day. The service wasn't as great as the first group. They had to tell the employees there if they needed something. They very often had to get it themselves. And again, they watered their own plants. And what they did was, Langer created this two different scenarios and then went back 18 months later. After 18 months, the second group, the group that watered their plants, the group that took care of their day, the group that was not catered for in the same way as the first group, they were less likely to be depressed, they were happier, they were more energetic, more independent, physically healthier. And the clincher, 18 months later, they were 50% more likely to be alive. The only difference being that that group that was healthier, happier, more likely to be alive had choice. They did their own thing. They were asked, what do you want to do, as opposed to being catered for, being supported. And in some way, this was too easy. There was no choice involved. And when we choose, when we do what we want to, it has implications to our well-being, to our success, and to our physical health, to the point of leading to longer life. Significant difference with such little intervention. And yet, so many of the old age homes today are built around the notion of let's cater to all their needs. Let's do everything that they desire. Let's make it easy for them. That's not necessarily good. There is too easy. Whether it's the notion that I talk about in the book, the underprivilege of privilege, where things are too easy, where we don't fail enough, whether it is in an old age home, where it becomes too easy, as opposed to making choices and struggling and making decisions. And it applies, as we will see later, also to the notion of stress and how important that can be in cultivating resilience and ultimately happiness. Too easy is not necessarily good. Finally, we see this also in oppressive regimes versus democracies. One of the main reasons why people are happier under democracies, and remember, that is one of the few external circumstances that can predict happiness. One of the reasons is because under democracies, people have choice. As opposed to under dictatorships, very often they're told, okay, you need to go into accounting, you need to go into engineering, and you need to go into athletics, and so on. And when you have a choice, that is a good predictor of happiness. Let's shift gear a little bit. I'm going to talk about something very much related to self-concordance, but from a different angle. I'm going to talk about values in action, or in short, the VIA. Values in action, the VIA, is arguably the most ambitious and certainly one of the most important projects within positive psychology. It was initiated by Chris Peterson, in the picture, professor at University of Michigan, and Marty Seligman. And what they wanted to identify was positive psychology's alternative to the DSM. The DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder, which is essentially the classification of all known mental disorders. It's a very thick book, a very important document where it says, for example, it lists certain criteria, and it says if a person has 7 of the 10 of these criteria for X period of time, that person has major depression. If the person has 3 out of the 4 criteria for Y period of time, that person has schizophrenia, or dysthymia, or seasonal affective disorder, or all of the psychopathologies that are known to us that have been defined and classified. A very important document. Come along Seligman and Peterson right at the beginning when positive psychology came onto the scene and say, let's create an alternative. Let's create an alternative to the DSM that will identify, instead of weaknesses, instead of pathologies, instead of deficiencies, it will identify individual strengths and virtues. And they identified 24 character strengths, all listed, explained, described in this book. Not only did they identify the character strengths, they also created mechanisms, ways, means of measuring these character strengths. For example, an online test, one which you will be taking next week, that can help you, as a first step, identify your values in actions. What are your character strengths? What are your virtues? What are you good at? What are you passionate about? The thing about these character strengths, when they identified them, they made sure that they identified universal characteristics. In other words, it wasn't chosen by, male, white academics living in America. This was research done all over the world, cross-culturally, to identify characters that are identical, whether it was in the United States or Europe, Asia, China, Japan, as well as the Maasai tribe in Kenya and the Inuits in northern Greenland. So this was an international research project, because what they thought, if we can find things that are common to all cultures, we will identify what is part of human nature as opposed to human nurture. And they admit, these may change over time. We may become more sophisticated in measuring them. But as a start, the character strengths and virtues, the values in action, manual and test, is an excellent start, and one which you will benefit from a great deal, as you will see shortly. The key aspect also of these characteristics is that they have a moral value. For example, the ability to run fast. It's certainly, some people have the strength, having more fast twitch than slow twitch, having stronger muscles, for instance. It's certainly a strength, but it's not a character strength, because it doesn't, in and of itself, have a moral component. You can use your strength and your speed toward moral ends, but in and of itself, it has not been valued as a moral characteristic. Similarly, in order for something to be a strength, it has to be used toward moral ends. For instance, as you will see, humor is one of the character strengths. However, if humor is used to hurt other people, as it sometimes is, it cannot be considered a strength. So it's used toward moral, noble ends. What values in actions are, in many ways, they are about a self-concordant journey. Meaning, when we set a goal, an outcome, we're about the destination. Yes, it certainly benefits the journey. Yes, it certainly helps us enjoy, by liberating us, helps us enjoy the here and now. But ultimately, what our focus is on the end result. With values in action, our focus is on specifically, directly, the journey. How can I enjoy getting to the end, my destination? Is it by engaging in a lot of learning? Is it by, which may be a character strength of mine, love of learning? Is it by engaging in leading other people? Leadership is one of those character strengths. Is it by being spiritual and praying along the path? If spirituality or awe is one of my character strengths. So it's helping us enjoy the journey on the way to a destination we deem valuable. In other words, if we have a self-concordant end and a self-concordant journey, this is what happiness is. Both present benefit, journey, as well as future benefit, outcome. And that's why it goes hand in hand with a self-concordant goal. It's not that self-concordant goals don't help us enjoy the journey, and it's not that via does not help us enjoy, reach a better outcome. It does. However, when they go together, we're more likely to experience a complete experience of happiness, of fulfillment. And a lot of research has shown how identifying our values in action, and more importantly, applying them, using them, exercising them, leads to higher levels of happiness and success. And this is not just correlational, there is a causal relationship. And your exercise for next week will be to implement it, which will ultimately, hopefully, lead to more success as well as more of the ultimate currency. In addition to the questionnaire that you will be taking, here are some other criteria to identify what are your personal character strengths. The first one is this the real me? Do I feel authentic, most myself, when I'm working in a group, when I'm leading people, when I'm learning something new, when I'm praying, when I'm watching a comedy or telling jokes or listening to jokes? When do I feel most myself? William James, back in the 19th century. I've often thought that the best way to define a man's character would be to seek out the particular mental or moral attitude in which, when it came upon him, he felt himself most deeply and intensively active and alive. At such moments, there is a voice inside which speaks and says, "This is the real me." When is the real you coming out? Is it when you act bravely? Is it when you apply yourself and work hard at something? Is it when you plan and you're prudent, careful about the future? That's a strength too. When you are acting according to your character strengths, you feel energized and you feel motivated. It comes from within. It feels natural. Again, this is about understanding your personal nature, the constrained view of human nature, as opposed to saying, well, all the strengths are me, or I can cultivate any of the strengths. Yes, it's true, and we all have some of all of the strengths. However, we also have certain inclinations embedded, whether it's in our genes, whether it's in our early experiences, and it's not that we cannot or should not cultivate the other strengths, but what we need to do is focus mostly on those strengths that are most natural to us, because that's when we get the most bang for the buck, so to speak, in the ultimate currency, that is, as well as in success, the conventional standard of success. And when we engage in those strengths, our personal strengths, that's when we grow the most, that's when we develop the most, that's when we learn the most. And again, ask yourself, as in a minute you'll be looking at the list of strengths, ask yourself, when does it feel the real me? Again, is it when I apply myself and work hard? Is it when I go against the grain and act bravely? Is that when I feel the most real, the most alive? Is it when I learn something new? Is it when I go to a museum? Is it when I pray? Is it when I'm around people who are funny? When is it the most me? Here is the list. Take just a minute to look at them. They're divided into 6 categories. There are 24 character strengths. And I just want you to be exposed to it right now because, again, for your homework, you'll get a printout of all these strengths with a description. Just take a few seconds to look through them and ask yourself, who are you when it comes to these strengths? Okay, here is what we're going to do. What we're going to do now is I'm going to introduce you to 2 exercises. 2 exercises that build on the VIA, that build on this questionnaire, that build on your identifying your personal character strengths. The first exercise you're actually going to be doing, that's next week for your response paper. The second exercise is one that I highly recommend doing. For lack of time, we can't also do that. The first one, and this is based on research done by Peterson and his colleagues, has been shown to have remarkable effects, remarkable consequences in terms of well-being as well as in terms of success. And what it is about is building capacity. It's about identifying the character strengths and then pursuing them. Just a quick recap about what it means to build capacity. You see, when you're thinking about character strength and applying character strength, what we know is that it helps you become happier. Remember, a self-concordant journey. So if I'm doing something and am constantly engaged in learning new things, if it is my personal strength, or expressing gratitude constantly, if that is my character strength, something that I'm inclined to do, I will be happier. In other words, going back to our model from the second or third class, it will help us go from the zero to the positive. However, what was found in this research is that it doesn't only help us go from the zero to the positive, it also helps us better deal with the negative. This it does directly. This it does indirectly. How? By building capacity. And if you think about it, this is what positive psychology is about, as we've discussed numerous times. It's about building capacity. It's about strengthening our immune system, making us more resilient, or the other analogy that we use, building a stronger motor, so that we can better deal with hardships, with uphill battles when these arise. So cultivating our via directly affects our journey. We enjoy it more, from the zero to the positive. And then it does something else. It also helps us build capacity so that we are better able to deal with the negative, with the difficulties, with the hardships when these inevitably arise. So here is the process. The first step is to identify your character strengths. Seems pretty obvious. The way to do it, two steps, two sub-steps. First, to take the questionnaire, to take the test. This is the website. It will all be emailed to you, plus it's on your, it's on the PowerPoint. To take this test, it's 240 questions, should take you about 30 minutes, and there are no right or wrong answers. It's not like it's better to have all in your top 5 and not so great to have prudence as your top 1, which, by the way, is my top value. There's no good, bad. It's identifying who you are. And all of them, again, we all have all 24. You know, I think gratitude is my 19. Now, does that mean that I don't enjoy being grateful? That the gratitude exercise that I do every day is not beneficial to me? Of course it is. But much higher for me is the love of learning. So take the online test, identify from there your 10 top ones. They recommend top 5. I recommend anywhere between 8 and 12. And then take these 8 to 12 strengths, read their descriptions, what they mean, what they're about, what they say about you, and then ask yourself which ones, which 5, or it could be 4, or it could be 6, but more or less 5. Which 5 fulfill the criteria that we discussed earlier? Namely, which are the real me? Or which ones, when I engage in them, I feel most energized and motivated? Or which ones do I grow and develop most from? And from these 8 to 12 strengths, identify 4 to 6 that most fulfill these strength criteria. And then choose any one of the character strengths from your final list and apply it. Meaning, every day for the following 7 days, and again, this will be your task for next week, apply this character strength. Every day for the 7 days after that, that will be up to you, and hopefully you will cultivate a ritual, a habit out of it. Apply the next character strength or the same character strength in a different way. So let me give you a personal example. The third time when I taught positive psychology, about halfway through the semester, I started to feel a little bit enervated, a little bit tired. You know, I've done it twice before. I knew what I was going to say. I've heard myself say it before. And I felt like I lost a bit of energy and a bit of oomph in teaching. And then I went back to the VIA, and I said, well, that makes a lot of sense, because my second strength after prudence is love of learning. And when I was teaching the same course, again, I wasn't learning that much new. So yes, I had new learnings in office hours. I always learn a lot. Those who have been to my office hours know that I jot down ideas as we're speaking. But as a whole, in the class, I was doing the same thing. And then I said, okay, so I'm going to engage in this exercise. And for me, that exercise was, let's take love of learning and continue it even when I'm teaching the same course. And I'm incredibly busy, even if I'm teaching the same course. But I still put an hour aside every day to learning something new, to reading something that I haven't read before. And what that did for me immediately, within 2 days, it brought back my energy. It had a trickle effect on other areas, such as my teaching, because I was reading something new, and then it also helped me teach better, not only in terms of energy, but also new ideas. You know, such as I introduce once in a while. Sometimes I tell you, I just read this book, and here is what I read. And I do it constantly, even though I'm very busy, because I know that that's important for well-being, for the ultimate currency, as well as for success, for performance. So applying whatever it is, whatever your top strengths are, consciously until it becomes a habit. And then, this will also be part of your exercise each night, describe how you use your strengths on that day, and then commit to the next day. What are you going to do tomorrow? Why? Because that reinforces the neural pathways. Remember when we describe something good. In many ways, the VIA to the DSM is like PPEO to PTSD. Remember that could be a GRE question. The analogy is PPEO, positive, PTSD, negative, is the same as the VIA compared to the DSM. The equivalence, positive psychology, and conventional psychopathology. So here is a second exercise after you do this. You can also apply it for problem solving, because in a sense, while the VIA indirectly builds capacity and helps us deal with problems, with difficulties, with uphills, we can also use it to affect our difficulties or to help us with our problems directly. So for example, the first step, same as the previous one. You first identify your character strengths by taking the test, by asking what are the criteria that these strengths fulfill, and then identify any problem, whether it's in personal life, whether it's on the sports field, whether it's in a relationship, whether it's at work. Identify a certain problem that you want to deal with. And then ask how you can apply one of the character or some of the character strengths toward that problem. So for example, let's take an example. Let's say one of the problems that I face is that I'm mostly avoiding. I'm afraid of taking risks. I don't put myself on the line because I'm anxious and afraid. And love of learning is one of my strengths. What I can do is use the love of learning to deal with my phobia, my anxiety, my fear of putting myself on the line. How? By learning all I can learn about how to better deal with phobia and anxiety. Which, by the way, is exactly what I did. Read every book I could find, talked to any person who I thought knew about it, used this strength and applied it to what had been a weakness of mine. Or relationships. Let's say we're going through a difficulty in a relationship, and one of my top strengths is, for example, authenticity. Then how can I use my authenticity in my interactions with my partner, and that will lead to higher levels of intimacy and improve the relationship in the long run? Which is exactly what I did. One of my top strengths, and applied it to cultivating more intimacy. Think of your own examples. Again, this will not be a response paper, but I highly recommend and urge you to apply it. Let's put some of these ideas together. Let's look at the decisions that some of you are making right now or will be making in the future, whether it's next year or 3 years from now or 20 and 40 years from now. How do you make a decision, and what may be a helpful framework for identifying a self-concordant journey as well as outcome? And one of the ways to do it is by looking at the work of Amy Wisniewski that I do talk about in the work chapter, but still worth going over again, about work orientation. And this can apply not just to work. We can apply to other areas in our lives. Generally, what Wisniewski and others found is that people's perception of work can be classified into 3 categories. Some people perceive their work as a job, others as a career, and yet others, not the majority, unfortunately, hopefully in the future the majority, some people perceive it as a calling. Primarily, it doesn't mean that the person who perceives his or her work as a calling does not sometimes experience it as a job. However, overall, they perceive their work as a calling versus a career versus a job. And you can distinguish them by looking at the following criteria. What motivates them? What keeps them going? What pushes and pulls them? What do they perceive work as? What is their interpretation of the workplace? What do they expect? What are they hoping for? And finally, what are they looking forward to in the future, in that work? So people who perceive their work as a job, motivation, paycheck at the end of the month or the end of the week. Work as something I have to do. It's a chore. I have no choice about it. What do they expect? Nothing much. They look forward to TGIF, or the holiday, the break, the end of the semester, the end of the 2-year period, or whatever it may be. The career perception, orientation. Money and advancement are what motivates these individuals, getting to the next stage. Work as, it's a race to the top. This is where the rat racers mostly reside. The expectation, more prestige, more power, more money, more prestige, more power. Again, advancement, attainment, achievement of the next goal. And they're looking forward to the next promotion. And this applies to different areas. It could be from pre-med to med school to internship at the best place to the chief head of the department to the chief of the hospital. It could be the race from being an analyst to an associate to a partner. It could be the race from being an assistant to an associate to a full professor. It can apply to any area, the rat race. The lucky few who perceive their work as calling, the motivation is the thing in itself. It's about a self-concordant goal. It's also about a self-concordant journey. How do they perceive work? It's a mission. It's a vocation. It's what they were meant to be doing. It's what they want to be doing more than anything else in the world. They see it not as a chore, but as a privilege to be engaged in what it is that they're doing. The expectations, their mission, a better world. And finally, what do they look forward to? More work where they can actualize themselves, where they can fulfill themselves, where they can be, to use the military cliche, all they can be. Now, when we look at this, it's mostly impossible to experience a sense of calling and mission and a self-concordant journey every hour of the day, just like it's not possible to be happy and to constantly and to experience that constant high. You know, for example, teaching is my calling. I certainly experience a sense of calling. It's the thing in itself. It's what I want to do professionally more than anything else in the world. At the same time, there are elements of teaching that I don't enjoy as much, and I do feel that I fall a little bit toward, well, this is my job, I have to do it. Such as going over my lecture notes 5 times before each lecture. The first time, pretty interesting. Second and third, it gets a little bit repetitive. But I know that if I want to produce a good and effective lecture, because that is my calling, teaching, I have to go over it many times. And I can tell the difference when I go over it once or twice versus 5 times. So that's important to me. But that part of my work, it is a chore, something that I have to do. However, remember the trickle effect, because overall, there is a sense of calling. Overall, it's a self-concordant goal, as well as journey. Even those parts are okay, not that bad. Or let's say you really enjoy a certain course. Let's take a hypothetical example, 1504. And another hypothetical example, you happen to have a midterm in a week. You may not enjoy every step of the way, going over the material for the second time or third time. However, if overall that experience is self-concordant, important to you, and you enjoy it, even that part will not be that bad. It will be okay. Especially if you start seeing that during that process you're beginning to make new connections, understand things, important things about yourself. The important thing also to keep in mind about calling is that while it does depend to some extent on the kind of work that you do, it depends much more on your perception of the work. So the research that I talk about in the book is about cleaners in a hospital who were able to see their work as a calling. Why? Because they interpreted their work not as, I have to pick up the garbage and clean the toilet, which they actually had to do, but more as, I'm taking care of these patients, because without my work, without me doing excellent work, there'd be more pollution and more people hurt in the hospital. And these people who perceived, these cleaners who perceived their work, had the calling orientation, were much more likely to engage in conversation with the patients in the hospital, were much more likely to help. And interestingly, many doctors from these same hospitals perceived their work as a job. Now, you are more likely, and again, not good, not bad, it is. You are more likely to find a sense of calling in your work if you're a leader versus the janitor or the cleaning person in an organization. It's more likely. However, that does not mean that the person who cleans the hospital cannot find a calling, and there are many examples. And the examples that Wisniewski talks about in the research are things such as comparing between cleaners and other cleaners, calling versus chore, between certain hairdressers who see their work as a chore versus ones who see it as a calling. And I'm sure you've had your hair cut with certain hairdressers who really do see it as a calling. I mean, there are more psychologists than hairdressers. Or engineers. Some just see their work, okay, I have to do this, that's all I think about, versus thinking about the bigger picture. I'm not just a cog in the mill, I'm part of an important project. We can perceive almost any work as falling into one of the 3 categories. Think about investment banking. I know many of you are going into investment banking. One of the ways to perceive investment banking is, I'm going there and I'm going to make a beep-load of money and I'm going to have a great lifestyle. And that's an important motivation. Again, people aren't and shouldn't be impervious to the material comforts. That's okay. However, people who only look at that, who only look, okay, that's going to give me a great lifestyle. I'm going to send my kids to the best schools, which is a good thing, and I'm going to live in a beautiful neighborhood, a beautiful house, and a big car, and have a lot of prestige. Again, human nature, these needs. It's fine. But people who just look at these things will not be happy or will not live up to their potential of happiness in the long run. However, if I look at investment banking as that and also an opportunity to create jobs, which it does do. J.P. Morgan and all the investment bankers who came up after him have created millions and millions of jobs that would not have existed without investment banking. That investment banking is also about lubricating the wheels of the economy. That it will also provide me an opportunity to then go and contribute, whether it's financially or from my knowledge, to not-for-profit organizations. Because today what not-for-profit organizations need most is effective, sound, professional fiscal policies, which you learn as an investment banker or a consultant or whatever it is. Now, some people say, you're rationalizing if you're looking at investment banking as all these things. You're not rationalizing. You know what you're doing? You're simply looking at reality, at things that are real, that are there, they're not invented, but most people do not see them, just like most people did not see the children on the bus. And when you don't see something, as far as you're concerned, it doesn't exist. And for most investment bankers, they burn out because they don't also, not only, but they don't also see the positive components of that work, components that certainly can fall under a calling. Again, most works, whether it's working in a hospital and taking care of cleanliness, whether it's working as a medical doctor, whether it's working as an investment banker, as a teacher, as a volunteer, as a monk, whatever it is, can be perceived as a job, can be perceived as a career, and can be perceived as a calling. And very often the choice is up to you. How do you interpret it? Abraham Maslow. It is certainly true that many of us evade our constitutionally suggested vocation, call, destiny, task in life, mission. So often we run away from the responsibilities dictated, or rather suggested, by nature, by fate, even sometimes by accident, just as Jonah tried in vain to run away from his fate. What is your fate? What is your calling? What is your destiny? Just listen to the voice that suggests your vocation. Just listen to the call that guides you to your calling. What is it? You know, the problem is that we don't take time to think about these questions. Sometimes because we're afraid of the answer. Because what if it is teaching? You know, what about all the pressure that I feel from outside to go and be a consultant? Or what if it is investment banking? What about all the pressure that I hear from my friends and colleagues who say, well, you should do something else, more quote-unquote noble with your Harvard education? The most noble thing is to listen to that inner voice. Because when we pursue our passions, when we pursue a self-concordant goal and a self-concordant journey, that's when we come alive. And that's when we also make the world a better place. Remember Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world. And if you want a happier world, begin with yourself. Easier said than done. But it's probably the most important question that you can ask of yourself. And by the way, the answer may change. It may be one thing today, it may be something different 2.5 years from now. And it may be very different 22.5 years from now or 50 years from now. But asking this question, when we really, truly ask this question, we open up possibilities and see things that we may have not seen before. Our, metaphorically speaking, children on the bus, our fate, our destiny, our vocation, our calling. I think it was captured best, this whole idea, by one of the students who sat where you're sitting just 2 years ago. Also one of the co-founders of Women in Business, Ebony Carter. Instead of focusing on what we can live with, we should be thinking about what we can't live without. What can't you live without? What are you about? Our next topic, related to goals, related to what we discussed last time, is something that I'm sure none of you can relate to, something that is completely foreign to you and your friends sitting around you, and that is not what I expected to come up on the screen. But soon we will get to that topic, I promise. So just a few, before we move on to that very important topic, I just wanted to build tension. It was all planned, of course. Before we get to that topic, just a few tips about setting goals. Some basic ones. First, write them down. Writing them down is making a commitment. Much more of a commitment than just saying them even. It's better to say them publicly than to say them just to ourselves or think about them, but writing them down makes a difference. A lot of research showing the effect of making plans, lists, and writing goals. Second, set lifelines. People talk about deadlines. Tammy, my wife, says, I think it's much more effective, much more useful to set lifelines. Dates by which we hope to achieve those certain goals. Why lifelines? Because goals, especially self-concordant goals, are about inspiring us. In other words, putting the spirit inside us. They're about making our life happier, more energetic. So lifelines, setting goals, very important. It's not, I will do the following soonish. It's, I will do the following by the 1st of July, 2009. Connected to this, make them specific. In other words, it's not, I'm going to improve sales pretty soon or very quickly, but rather, I'm going to increase sales 5% by December 31, 2008. Specific lifeline as well as specific project. Also, let's say I want to become fit. It's not just the generic, I want to become fitter. It's rather, I'm going to run 5 miles 4 times a week by October 15, 2008. Concrete, specific. Remember what we talked about. The most important thing about goals is not achieving those goals. It's not that that is what will make us happy or sad if we do or don't achieve them. The key is to energize us, to motivate us, to liberate us, to contribute as a means toward the end being the journey. The goals that facilitate the journey best are goals that we actually have, not all goals, but some goals, 50% of achieving. It's the goals such as Kennedy set in 1962. Will reach the moon by the end of the decade, at the time when the metal that was necessary to withstand the heat of getting out of space and coming back to Earth was not even invented. It was at a time when they did not have the technology on numerous levels to land a person on the moon. And yet he declared that goal, that by the end of this decade we will do it. It energized NASA. Some people thought he was crazy, but it energized them. And you know that after 1969, NASA experienced a real drop in their motivation, in their passion, until essentially the mid-80s, because they didn't have a similar inspiring goal. We see it also on the individual level. and I talk about it in the book, where people had goals and then did not achieve these goals, or achieved these goals and did not set new goals. And they felt enervated and very often uninspired. Stretch goals. Alan Langer did the following research, bring in a group of people and introduce them to highly successful scientists and inventors. And then she asked them, these were world famous, world-class performers. And she asked these individuals, these students, to assess these very successful individuals and then to say, how likely are you to reach their level? And they assessed them extremely highly, they respected them, they admired them, and they said that they were unlikely to achieve that level. And then she brought a second group of students and she got them to look at the exact same individuals, same highly successful scientists, inventors, people who really made it, with one difference. She also introduced some of the characteristics of their path toward greatness. For example, failures on the way, insecurity, disappointments, hardships, and how they actually got from point A to point B. And then she asked them to evaluate them, and they respected them highly, just as much. And when she asked, how likely are you to achieve those goals? Much more likely. And as we know, beliefs are self-fulfilling prophecies. Number one predictor of long-term success, in addition, the John Cotter research, in addition to constantly asking questions, it's believing that you can do well. And if we only look at the outcome and not the journey, we're much less likely to believe that we can attain this outcome. Breaking down success. As Langer said, people can imagine themselves taking steps, while great heights seem entirely forbidden. Have a long-term goal, and then break it down to a shorter-term or a medium-term goal, short-term goal, and then make plans, and then create rituals based on these plans. Step by step, breaking down achievement, much more likely to believe that it's possible, and consequently much more likely to actually get there. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the moment you've all been waiting for. Something that none of you are familiar with, that you may not be able to connect to, but something that, please indulge me, and I will talk about. Stress. So I asked at the beginning of the class who wants to experience less stress. Most of you put your hand up. Stress is a global, not American, not Western, global epidemic. By the end of this class, within 20 minutes, my hope is that we will all look like this. Minus the beer if you're not 21 yet. Now, the most important thing when dealing with stress, and again, it is a global, very problematic epidemic. We talked about procrastination. This is what I do when I procrastinate. I go on Google Image and look for things like that. And then I tell myself, it's part of your work, it's important. Yeah. It's all about cognitive reframing. When dealing with stress, what we need to do is take time out. Let me share with you, and again, I've talked about this before, but this is from the New England Journal of Medicine, an article written by our very own Richard Kedison. He's the head of mental health services here. In a recent national survey of 13,500 college students, nearly 45% reported being so depressed that they had difficulty functioning, and 94% reported feeling overwhelmed by everything they had to do. 45%. You know, people, when they asked me about the class at Harvard, the fact that it's a popular class, they said, is it because it's Harvard? It's because at Harvard there is more stress than... No, there isn't. In fact, when the Crimson did ask a similar question, they found at Harvard 47%. So really, no difference nationwide, regardless of which university, which college you go to. This is startling. I mean, I was shocked. I mean, I've been on college campus for the last 16 years. I know the situation, but I was even surprised by this number. And this is not the regular ups and downs that we go through 10 times a day. This is depression to the point of not functioning. How can we explain it? The 45%, by looking at the 94%. Let me be more specific. You see, students today clearly have too much to do. When I was a resident tutor in Leverett House, given that my PhD was also from the business school, my role was a pre-business tutor. So what I did, as many of you know, was I looked at students' resumes, at the CVs, and helped them hone it, make it better for the recruiting process or other processes where they were looking for work. And it really amazed me that just about every year, the resumes became more impressive. Smaller fonts, bigger titles, narrower margins. Each year, you know what very often the older generation says, who has gone to Harvard, they say, I wouldn't have gotten into Harvard today. It's true. It's unfortunate, but it's true. And I looked at these resumes and I was very impressed. And I said, wow, until I noticed the price that students, you, me, were paying for the smaller fonts and narrower margins. And the price is that we feel overwhelmed, too much to do, stress, anxiety, and as a result of it, and there's a lot of data supporting this arrow, as a result of this, higher likelihood of depression. And this is what we see on college campuses. This is what we see around the country. This is what we see around the world. Because I'd recently returned from China, not very different from this. I recently came from Australia, very similar to this. Trying to fit in too many things into little time, taking more courses, being part of more student organizations. And that exacts a price. Okay, here she is. The psychologist, the one and only Ellen DeGeneres, talking about the state of affairs.
I believe that someday sitcoms will be 30 seconds long. Because that's all we'll need, and that's all our attention span can take, because our attention span is shot. We've all got attention deficit disorder, ADD, or OCD, or one of the disorders with 3 letters, because we don't have the time and patience to pronounce the entire disorder. That should be a disorder right there. TBD, too busy disorder. The weather is actually the happiest part of the news, because at some point you're going to hear something positive. You're going to hear, it's a beautiful day, or it's going to be a beautiful day. And it's nice to take in something positive, you know, because we hear all this negative stuff all the time, and we go out into the world and it's so chaotic, and not that we're going to notice if it's a beautiful day, we're moving too fast to even pay attention to that. And we need help to keep up with that pace, so we put a coffee shop here, and there's a coffee shop here, and a coffee shop here, and a coffee shop here, and the smallest coffee is a tall, and I'll have a coffee and a side of Red Bull, because I'm very, very busy. I've got TBD and I'm late for yoga. Hurry, hurry!
TBD should be part of the DSM. Really should be. We pay a very high price for this TBD. First of all, psychological health, one of the best predictors of depression. Physical health. Many doctors estimate that about 80% of our physical ailments are a result of stress, weakened immune system. And finally, today, this year, the number one cause for loss of days at work globally is something related to our psychology, whether it's stress or related emotions, feelings, experiences. It never used to be that in the past. Today, it's psychological reasons. And we pay a price both in terms of our productivity as well as creativity. Think back to the broaden and build theory. When we're stressed, we're more likely to narrow and constrict as opposed to think outside the box. All right, so what do we do with this stress? What do we do with it? Let's use positive psychology, because it really is a problem that we want to be able to deal with, that I know, certainly personally, it's a problem that I've dealt with for a very long time. So the conventional question, the traditional psychologist question was, why are so many people stressed? An important question, good question that yielded many great answers, but not enough. And then positive psychologists came in, and what they did was ask also the positive question. Just like when we talked about the research with at-risk population, just like Marva Collins asked a different question, because questions open up avenues, quests that we may have not seen before. And the question became, what do those who are successful and able to lead a healthy and happy life do? In other words, focusing on what works. In other words, focusing on the tip of the stem. Because while most people are stressed, not all of them are. There are people who are able to be successful and at the same time lead a healthy and happy life. What do they do? What is it about them? Here is what they do. What was found was that there are some distinguishing characteristics, two of them. They set rituals for themselves, and we talked about rituals in the past. The second thing that they do, and this is what I'm going to elaborate on now, the second thing that they do in addition to having rituals, whether it's a lot of rituals or a few rituals, depending on individual needs and differences, in addition to setting rituals, they particularly set rituals for both work and for recovery. Let me explain. Let me explain. What I'm going to say now is something that psychologists did not see before because it was hidden, just like the children on the bus were hidden by the first question. It was only after asking the second question that they noticed this. What they noticed was that these individuals ritualized work and recovery, and in essence, what they found, and this is the most surprising result to my mind in studying stress, is that stress was actually not the problem. We were looking in the wrong place. In fact, what they found was that stress was good for us. That stress actually cultivated resilience, strength, and helped us be happier in the long run. Wait a minute. What does that mean? Well, think about the following analogy. Think about the physical realm. What happens to you? What actually happens to you when you go to the gym? When you go to the gym, you lift weights. What are you doing to your muscle? You're stressing your muscle. In fact, you're tearing parts of it. There are micro tears in your cells. Now, is this a bad thing that you're doing that? Not at all. It's a good thing because you lift weights, and then 2 days later, you lift these weights again, and the next week you continue lifting these weights, and you do it for a month, and 2, and 4 months, and 6 months, and after a year of lifting weights, you begin to look like me. Or maybe not. So the stress part is actually good for us. What's the problem, though? When do the problems begin with stressing those muscles? It's when you lift weights, and a minute later you lift the same weights again, and again, and again, and again, and so on and so on. What would happen to you then if you don't take a break, whether it's a break between sessions or whether it's a day's break? What happens to you then? That's when you get injured. That's when you get hurt. That's when you actually tear or pull a muscle. That's when you become overworked, and that has psychological as well as physical effects. That's when you overtrain. In other words, the problem is not stress, not on the physical level, nor on the psychological level. The problem is lack of recovery. Individuals who are both successful, happy, thriving, flourishing, are ones who do experience stress. However, they also pay very close attention to recovery. Just like any athlete here in this room knows, you have tapering, you have time off before important games. You don't lift the same weights day in and day out. The same thing on the psychological level. If we don't take breaks, we will pay a price. On the physical level, we get injured. On the psychological level, we experience anxiety, ultimately, potentially, depression. Stress is fine, it's good, it's exciting at times if we also have recovery. I want to share with you now some more ideas from the book that I talked about before, The Power of Full Engagement, that again I highly recommend you read, maybe over spring break. And what Tony Schwartz and Jim Lohr talk about is that what we need to do is change our perception of our day from being marathon runners to being sprinters. From going on and on and on to sprinting, recovery. Sprinting, recovery. That understanding changed my life. You see, I was a marathon runner, metaphorically, meaning at work. I used to work 14 hours a day. I loved my work. I worked extremely hard. And then I decided to get married and to have children. And I knew that things would change as a result of that. And I said, okay, I'll have to compromise. I'll have to work less than 14 hours a day if I want to maintain a healthy relationship with my spouse and with my kids. And it disappointed me to some extent, but I had my priorities and I made a choice. And then I met Tony Schwartz, who within a few minutes changed my perception, my understanding of what my day can and ought to look like. And when he explained to me this, it made immediate sense. I started to implement it. And today, I may not be as productive as I was when I worked for 14 hours a day, but very close to it. And I'm certainly happier and I'm more creative than I was when I was a marathoner. And here is his suggestion. One of the things that he talked about in the book. This is the ritual that I recommend. And it is, have 60 to 120 minutes, so around 90 minutes of sprint. Work, concentrate, focus, hard, go for it. And then, after that, after you sprint with as little distractions as possible, have 15 minutes or so of recovery. What psychologists have found is that essentially we're able to sprint, to focus, according to our biorhythms, between 60 and 120 minutes. It differs. Some people are more 60, others can do it for 2 hours. Average, 90 minutes. After you sprint, take 15 minutes off, whether it's for meditation, listening to your favorite piece of music, whether it's for going to the gym. It can be, of course, more than 15 minutes, but at least 15 minutes. Having lunch, having a break, and during lunch not doing emails and being on the phone, which only adds to the stress. Really relaxing with friends or by ourselves. And when we have a day that's structured with sprint, recovery, that's when we can sustain, when we have the highest levels of energy, when we get the most done, and when we're happiest. This is my day now. My day comprises sprint, recovery, sprint, recovery. I'm able to get so much more done. My ideal day, work day, is 90 minutes, 15-minute meditation, 90 minutes, lunch, 90 minutes, workout, 90 minutes, home with the family. Actually, net, I work for 6 hours a day. But in those 6 hours, I get more than I would have in 10. Not to mention the fact that I'm happier and more creative doing it. The key when doing it is to maintain flexibility. Because, again, the ideal day for me would be that. However, there are other things. You know, I travel a lot. I teach a class. And during those times, let's say I'm not by my computer writing or doing research. And again, because these are important things to me. So what I've done, for example, is say, I want 10 90-minute sessions, the ritual of 10 90-minute sessions a week. Some of these 90-minute sessions are on a flight, and that's okay. Some of these 90-minute sessions are at home or in my office. But at least 10, usually more than 10 90-minute sessions a week. And when I have that, I'm happy, I feel good, I get a lot done. Also, the ritual of yoga. Maintain flexibility there. So one of the things that were difficult for me was to introduce a 45-minute or a 1-hour session a day. And now yoga is important for me. It makes me feel good, and I'll talk about the research around it after break. So what I started to do was breaking down yoga sessions, and now part of my 15 minutes in between is a 15-minute yoga, sun salutations, for 15 minutes. And then the next 15 minutes is another part of a yoga practice. So I break yoga into 2 or 3 sessions a day instead of 1. Again, the flexibility of a ritual. And that for me works very well. The key is, and I'm going to end with this, the key is to attain multi-level recovery. First, recovery on the micro level. 15 minutes meditation, 1 hour of gym, whatever it is, a lunch break. Mezzo level recovery, and that is a good night's sleep. We'll talk about the importance of sleep. Sleep is a good investment for well-being, happiness, as well as for your creativity, for your memory. Sleep is important. A day off during the week. Even God needed a day off. Implemented in our lives. And finally, those vacations. Remember J.P. Morgan, I can do the work of a year in 9 months, but not in 12. Recreation leads to creation. So remember that. Remember that. Next week, we meet on Tuesday here for the midterm. Thursday, we don't have class. And remember the vacation. Take time, enjoy it, and good luck. See you after break.